As I look through our agenda here and everything you guys got going on, there's a couple things that stick out to me. We talk a lot about success on the farm. We talk a lot about entrepreneurship. We talk a lot about the things that we need to do to succeed. And a lot of what I'm going to cover here today as we try to find where our place is in the agricultural industry is I'm going to talk about why those things are important. And we're going to take a look at what's going on in the ag industry, what we've seen in the other sectors of the ag industry, and why it's important that we try to keep our families on the farm. I wake up every day coming to work to try to keep families on the farm and bring them together so that they can do that. So one of the things that I've seen in the ag industry, and coming from a background where I had one grandfather who ran his farm like a business and one who just ran it by the seat of his pants, was that as farms grow, and we do grow naturally, if you look at the ag industry from generation to generation, farms are growing somewhere between 7 to 12% from one generation to another. But what's not growing is the business side of agriculture, right? We're seeing a lot of inadequate growth in farms because as they get bigger, their day-to-day activities are keeping them from developing the business side of their farm. And the reason this is important is because if we go through history and look at what's happened in the other ag sectors, we can see that if we don't manage our farms more like a business, other industries come in and take it over. So if you go back 50 years ago and you look at the poultry industry, there were poultry, it was a lot like pork was in the 80s. Everybody had poultry, right? And today, the USDA does not even recognize an individual poultry producer. In a 50-year period, poultry production has decreased by 98%, right? So when you think about poultry today, who do you think about? Tyson, Purdue, Butterball. These used to be the guys that supported the poultry industry, right? And as time went on, they squeezed the individual poultry producer out of production, and they set the prices and forced the individual producers out. Now that sounds very negative. It wasn't exactly like that. They were trying to help out at the time. But whenever the farms couldn't be managed and more farmers got out, they saw a business opportunity and they decided to step in and take it. And as we continue to go through these, I want you to think about this because in the grain industry, we have a window of opportunity, a huge window of opportunity where if we can develop our farms properly, then we can have control of the grain industry instead of letting conglomerates come in and take it over. Now, if you look at the pork industry, in 1988, I was 8 years old. There were 320,000 pork producers in the U.S. I could walk down the street of the Whited farm. There were 5 houses there, and all the houses except for one had pork, right? In less than a 29-year period, the pork industry has decreased to about 56,000 producers. Now, since I never got the opportunity to come back to farm, I studied a lot on consolidation in the industry, so that doesn't surprise me. What does surprise me is that 48,000 of those producers produce less than 1% of the revenue, and in the pork industry, they're irrelevant. When there's any kind of swing, they will go out of business. In 2010, 5% of the hogs were sold on the open cash markets, with the remaining 95% of all hogs were either owned outright by a company like Smithfield or sold under some kind of contract. And while we've seen a decrease in pork operations, we've seen an increase of production. which is very interesting because as you continue to walk through the different industries, you see this happening ongoing. As operations get bigger, they produce more. Dairies in a 10-year period fell by a third. Once again, milk production increased by 15%, and 75% of dairies are now members of a co-op, which, believe it or not, in some cases, help drive consolidation. And as we talk about the beef industry, this one I love to talk about because I watch it happen with my own eyes. In 2009, I went down to the Panhandle of Texas, and I visited with an operation in Dumas, and then I went down to Lubbock, and I got to see all these feedlots that I thought were huge compared to the ones that are in Illinois, where I came from. In that time, the feedlot industry has decreased by 50%. In 2016, I got the opportunity to go back and take that exact same journey. And I got to see these feedlots that I thought were just huge back then, but today they stretched on for miles. And as you can see in the industry, that there are a lot of operations who are more or less hobby beef farmers, and then there are very few operations who pretty much corner the market of the beef industry. And everybody in the middle is at risk as the operations continue to consolidate year after year. And so how has consolidation affected the grain industry? Well, today the largest 11% of operations farm 80% of the ground in the United States. The smallest 52 farm 2% of the ground. And really in a 10-year period, you've seen operations increase their acre size to 10,000 acres, about 179% of the industry. And this is very interesting to me because whenever I came into the ag industry, since I couldn't come back to the farm, the average size of the producer that I talked to was about 1,500 acres. But if I talked to a guy back in 2006 that was farming 5,000 or 6,000 acres, it was very rare. Today, it is very uncommon for me to talk to guys that size, right? Most operations that I run across, 10, 15, 30,000 acres, right? It's becoming the new norm in the ag industry. So one of the things that we look at is what are the macro trends in the industry. The reason this is very important is because this starts to help you guys as operations prepare yourselves for what's coming down the pipeline. So one of the main consolidations in the ag industry when it comes to age is that today there are 1.3 million producers in the ag industry that are age 55 and above. Okay? From 35 to 54, that number is cut in half. There's only about 680,000 producers who have chosen to come back and farm that are able to take on the acres that are going to come down the pipeline. And under that, 35 and under, there's only about a quarter of the numbers. This tells us that operations are going to get bigger. They're going to get larger for those who take advantage of it. Also, another factor is that up here in the 55 and above, that's where the wealth resides. Now, the important thing to do, though, is pass that wealth down to the next generation. And that's one of the struggles that we've had in the ag industry. For those family members who want to come back and farm, how do we pass that wealth and business onto the next generation where it's not constraining their ability for growth? So one of the things that, we talk about a lot and that some individuals will bring up as objections is, well, there'll be other people to enter and exit the ag industry. Well, it doesn't matter how you look at it because it's not going to change the numbers that drastically, right? Some people will fail and get out of the ag industry. Other people will come into the ag industry. But chances are the other people that are coming into the ag industry aren't traditional farmers. They'll be investors or they'll be conglomerates. So land acquisition by farm size. We're finding it to be increasingly difficult for smaller farm operations today to be able to grow their business. I mean, a lot of the things that you talk about at these conferences, you know, they talk about the things that we need to get in place in order to do it. But how do you actually implement that on your farm in a day-to-day practice? Well, you see that acres that are 5,000 and above are able to add acres easier. That's economy of scale there. We have seen that as farms get to a certain size, they can almost double overnight and it not be a big deal for them. And one of the other things that we've seen is that 60% of farmland was owner-operated, and that the amount of owned farmland has remained fairly steady over the past 50 years. The reason I believe for this is the fact that a lot of operators I talk to, they say if we own all the land, it's easier for us to control, right? Easier to make a profit and control. Unfortunately, when you don't add rented acres, it also constrains growth. I've almost seen in a lot of operations that we've worked with, and I'm going to start studying this a little bit more, is that the good balance is about a 50-50 mix of owned versus rented land. Now, when I talk about consolidation, I always worry that it comes off very negative. But for the other industries, it has been negative because it's decreased our ability and our margins keep shrinking. But in the grain industry, we still have a window of opportunity. From 2015 to 2019, there are going to be 20 million acres that are going to pass from one generation to another. And if they don't pass from one generation to another, they're going to pass to investors, right? And in this chart, it shows us that we just have about 1 year left in this cycle. But later on, we're going to take a look at how many acres are going to be up for grabs in the next 5 years. So one of the other factors that drives consolidation is technology. Now, when technology first came out, the big slogan was, it's going to help us save time. But it really didn't help us save time. What it allowed us to do is to be able to do more with less. And what we've seen is that since 1948 to 2013, we've been able to increase our production. We've been able to do more with less. And one of the things that's coming down the pipeline that's really going to impact consolidation is autonomous equipment. It cracks me up when I talk about this. I put a blog on this recently out on the web and the controversy that it caused. I mean, people were like, well, do you support this? This is going to hurt us. You know, people just got really up in arms. And then other people were like, well, you know, it's a reality. It doesn't matter if I support it or not. The reality is autonomous equipment is coming. And what autonomous equipment is going to do is to allow one man to farm more acres with less employees and to do it 24 hours a day. So whether we like it or not, we need to choose to embrace it or remain where we're at today. And some of the things that we've seen operators do that's a little bit different than traditional farms. I mean, if I went to my Papa White back to the day and said, look at your financials to help you improve profitability, what do you think he would have done to me? He was 72 years old. Exactly. I remember coming to him whenever corn on corn got profitable, right? And I went to him, and with all the zeal that I could muster, I said, we're doing corn on corn, and we're going to help make you more profitable. And I thought the man was going to take my head off, and he was a big man. So even at 72, he was a big man. But it's because he didn't have that knowledge back in the day. So a lot of operations that are helping to streamline what they're doing and to become more profitable and to grow, they're figuring out how to use data in their farm. I see two kinds of people. Those who say, well, we get a lot of data, but we don't know its value, right? Other people are using artificial intelligence. They're devoting time to analysis, and they're using money. If they can't take the time, or they're like me, right? I'm not a numbers guy. It would drive me crazy to thumb through all those pages of data. But I know how important it is, so they're outsourcing the analysis of the data so that they can make decisions. One of the things Farm Credits talked about was having financials so that you can make decisions based off the reality of your farm. I've been talking to producers about that for 12 years, right? Learn how to interpret the data and learn how to apply it, because we're going from following industry trends to doing things that are more profitable, making decisions based on what our farm's doing. So the third issue is capital. And what we've found is that whenever you get to a farm that's producing about $5 to $7 million in revenue, those who are able to succeed long-term, because we've all seen the stories, right? Big farms go out of business. They're overly leveraged, and then boom. And then it creates a bad name for everybody, right? But what we found is, really they're the minority. That's just the ones that's media, publicized. But those farms that have learned to use dollars to invest in capital for new hires are the ones that are really able to make a difference on their farm. And so what that looks like, and this is where, we talk about where do we fit in, right? In order to be successful, we can't look at trying to mess with just the margins, right? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to get better deals, sell more, buy less. What I'm saying is we need to start investing in knowledge, because capital in the future will be used to hire management who knows how to implement processes that create profit, and then that can be added to capital. If we can't control the margins, we have to control how profitable we are inside of our business with how we work day to day. Another reason this is important, because I don't know how many farms, right, that do what they do that doesn't want to have a farm for their kids and for their kids' kids, right? It's a legacy. I mean, that gets thrown out a lot. But I don't imagine that my Papa Whited put all the blood, sweat, and tears into his farm only to have it disappear when he dies. I mean, why would you live like that? I mean, he lived very conservatively. He didn't make as much as some of his buddies, but he did what he loved every day. But he wanted to pass that on to the next generation. But if we don't find our place in the ag industry, whether we like what's going on or not, then other businesses are going to come in and take it over. 30% of the farmland today is owned by non-operators who lease it out to farm. That really falls into two categories, right? Guys who grew up on the farm who no longer farm, or investors. They see an opportunity and they invest in it. And one of the greatest times, and Kyle and I talk about this a lot, the best time to invest is in a down market. That doesn't apply just to investments in the stock market. It applies in farmland too. And the guys that have the money to do it understand this. So this is where the next 5 years is going to be very important for your operations. There's going to be 92 million acres that are going to pass from that 55 and above, as well as from investors who get scared from their investments in the ag industry. And that's going to change hands. And what we're telling people is that if we don't prepare our farms, then it's going to pass to investors rather than traditional farms. Now, who do you want to control your industry? Do you guys want to have control in it? Or do you want guys in business suits to have control over it? Right? The fourth factor that's driving consolidation is organizational structure. A lot of times whenever I talk to people about this, they focus on just entity. And entity structure is greatly important in the industry. But we also have to look at how are we going to function internally, right? And so a lot of the farms, or the farms that work with us, this is the structure that we've built for them so that they can begin utilizing expertise in all these different areas. They can have somebody who gets the brunt of the day-to-day work, and they can work as owners in their business, right? Because here's the reality. Right now, most farms, we do the day-to-day activities because we love it, right? And I'm not saying don't get out there and do what you love. But when that's all that you focus on, it is hard to run your business like an owner. So I always say that most farms I talk to, they're not running a business, they're running their job, right? Because an employee, if he's a good employee, should yield you about $100,000 a year. If he's a skilled employee that has the right kind of education and personal development, he should yield you about $200,000 a year, right? But a business owner makes decisions that makes his business millions of dollars a year, right? Because they have the control. And instead of worrying about the day-to-day activities, you need to develop a man, an operator, to be your general manager or somebody in the family so that you can work as a business owner and you have managers in all these different areas managing the people that you have in place. And the fifth piece that we saw is the simple fact that people like my Papa Whited, while I loved him and he was a great man, he just couldn't envision what was coming down the pipeline. You know, 10 or 12 years ago, whenever I started into this industry, I never in my life believed that farming would be where it is today. I mean, think about how much it's changed in a 12-year period. When I came in, they had auto steer. I'd never even seen auto steer. Of course, I didn't even know how to turn on a computer back then. But think about where your family farm began. They were like my Papa Whited, right? They didn't have the knowledge that you could do something like corn and corn, so it just seemed like it was impossible. Now think about your own operation 5 or 10 years ago. Does your farm operation today look like your farm operation did 10 years ago? The industry is changing and it's going to continue to change. And so in a consolidating industry, there are only two participants, and it doesn't make it right and it doesn't make it wrong. You can choose what side of the fence that you want to be on. But you're either going to be on the consolidator side of the fence or you're going to be a consolidatee. And so when we talk about where do we fit in, and so I've given you a lot of the foundation of what's going on, but I haven't really talked about where farms fit in into this industry. Well, first you have to decide what side of the fence do you want to be on. And if you decide that you want to have a farm that is long-term and sustainable for multiple generations, then you got to decide what steps that you're going to take. Because there are going to have to be 3 focus areas that you focus on. How do you enhance value and reduce risk? That is real dollars that are driven down to the balance sheet, right? So basically no different than what farm credit. How do you make yourself more profitable? Making those small incremental changes. But then How do you build value on the farm, right? So Peter Drucker, who was the management guru, said that any business that just drives balance sheet value is creating essentially inadequate growth, because you have to build value on the farm. You have to have the intelligence, the knowledge, the personnel there to help you continue to grow, because any industry, as it gets to a certain size, has to start using capital different, or they'll start going backwards. And then how are you going to promote legacy? How are you going to brand yourself and your farm and get out there? I believe that any farm operation, in order to stay competitive, is going to have to stay up on management, size, technology, and capital. Questions? I always feel like I deliver a gloom and doom message when I do this, but it's really not. So one of the things that you guys can do is, if you have questions about consolidation and what farms are doing, because Family Farms Group is a farmer-owned organization who are looking at the forces of consolidation, getting them in place in our farm and as a group, so that we can challenge the status quo of what's went on in the other ag industries. So we've found that coming together, we can do more than we can as individuals on our farm. Very similar as to what the Farm Bureau's doing, very similar to what Farm Credit's doing, and just like them, we're governed by the farms who we work with. So we represent about 89 farms all over the US and Canada, and we're not all corn and soybeans. And we're coming together so that consolidation doesn't happen to us like it has in other industries.